Hi, welcome to the Aspire Europe introduction video to business change management. My name is Rod Sowden, Managing Director of Aspire, and also the lead author for Managing Successful Programs in P3M3. I'm going to take you through a few ideas that will set the course up for you, and I hope you find it useful. The first thing we need to do is agree what we're talking about. So we're not talking about change management in terms of change control, scope creep and changing timescales and all that kind of stuff. This is about organizational change. Here's a pretty reasonable description about what's needed. It's just we need to be systematic in the way we bring in new practices, whether they're originating from a project or a program or some other source. People get attached to their old ways of working. There's reasons why they don't want to change, and we have to manage that. If we don't, the organisation will fail and won't be able to keep up with the demands of the industry around it. So in this course, we're just going to introduce some of the ideas that you'll no doubt go into much more depth on later on. As I just said in the other slide, people become attached to the silliest things when they're actually working. And when we, as agents of change, look to remove some of those things, we can come up against all sorts of obstacles that people can put in our way. But first of all, we need to think about the scope of change. When we talk about delivering change, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about a holistic scenario. So, firstly, we need to think about people. They're the most complicated thing to change, and they will vary between organizations because some organizations are much more agile than others. And in those agile organizations, they're better geared to cope with change. So we've got to think about people. It's not just their emotions, it's around their structures, their working practices, their skills, and their ability to adapt to new ways of working. We then need to think about processes. This is how things get done. Quite often, change comes as a result of changing processes. As an organization, we may have decided to change our supply chain, or we may have decided to bring in new technology or something or other. That will affect our process, and the people ultimately operate the process. So we need to think about those implications. As I just said, we change systems to go with it. When we say systems, we can mean anything from manufacturing, for example, if you think in terms of the car industry, as we're moving towards electric vehicles, the whole system of manufacture is changing. The processes need to change, and they probably need very different people to assemble electric cars from maybe the traditional mechanical cars. So we need to see the whole system, how it functions, how the processes and people work. And finally, this drives into our culture. So we need to think about what our values are. Are we changing those values? And what do we need to do to help staff and customers and the other people in our environment cope with that? So just how does change happen? It tends to come three ways. We'll have the vision-led type change, which comes from the top. Maybe the new chief exec comes in, feels they need to change things, or maybe the organization has seen an opportunity to move into a new market. A very common one is compliance, where the organization has to move to survive. This could be because it's legal, or it could be pressures to work in different ways. You can see around you the massive move towards digital. The fact you're watching this video rather than sitting in front of us in a classroom would suggest that there's compliance changes coming along in the way that you guys do training. And there's emergence, one where change kind of creeps up on us. Most change is a combination of those, actually. Something has to happen, which would be compliance. Vision is how we're going to get through it, and then we incrementally get there through which appears like emergent change. When we're thinking about delivering change, it's all about individuals, and we need to think about the factors that affect them, and that'll help us influence them and get them on board. So some areas that we need to consider is their learning styles. How do they take in new information? Within the full course, we'll look at different things in this area, different ways of learning. Some people are activists, some people like theory, some people like reflecting. But one of the areas that we need to be aware of is people quite often do their job subconsciously there, and we call that unconscious competence. Now, there's 4 stages that we should be aware of. There's unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And if we think about it in that way, you imagine the first time you went to drive a car, if you wanted to drive a car, yeah, you don't actually know how difficult it's going to be until you start it. So you're really unconsciously incompetent. It's only when you sit behind the steering wheel and start driving and working pedals, you become consciously incompetent. Now, that's also the same with business change. You know, during this course, you'll probably become consciously incompetent because you'll start to learn about the things that you don't know and that you need to get better at to be good as a business change manager. So learning styles is really important because people need to learn the new ways of working. Then we've got to think about motivation. What's driving people? There's different theories of motivation. There's the Taylor X and Y theory, for example, and that was thinking about whether are people rewarded by monetary rewards or are they rewarded by other things. So if they get recognition, for example, do they rate that higher than getting another few pounds a week money-wise? So we need to understand why people are motivated. Now, quite often the assumption is the motivation is by money, but the evidence from lots of research is that people are more motivated by other factors, and there's some really good stuff by a guy called Hertzberg who talks about hygiene factors, which are the soft things around working. You know, if your boss is telling you you're doing a great job, that's really important to you, but you might find that if you feel you're underpaid, that actually demotivates you. So reward and money tends to demotivate if it's not adequate, but motivation tends to come from soft stuff beyond that. Okay, so there's some stuff around that we need to think about. We then need to think about personality types. Now, people react in different ways to different problems. I'm sure you'll be very aware of that. And the one in the course talks about Myers-Briggs. So Myers-Briggs looks at 4 dimensions of our personality. Are we introvert or extrovert? Do we kind of emotionally react, which is feeling, or do we react logically, which is thinking? And then do we jump to judgment, or are we perceiving? Are we happy to live with ambiguity? And people in different professions will have very different types of personalities. In my experience, you know, I worked in an organization where engineers are very big at being judgmental. They like it to be black or white. You work in marketing and they're much more happy with a bit of ambiguity in there, which is more perceiving. So we think about personality types. And then we've got to think about the emotional journey people are going to go through as individuals as part of change. So you may have heard of the bereavement curve or the change curve. When people get bad news, there's normally a period of shock, anger, upset, looking to blame people. Then they go through depression, and hopefully we find opportunities and green shoots of recovery coming. And you know, then we engage with the process of change. Now, you've got to allow people to go through those emotions, because everybody goes through it. It doesn't matter who you are. They may be hiding it, but they will go through those emotions. So we need to think about the individual change factors as part of the whole. When we think about team change and team leadership, we need to factor these in. We've just considered all the complexities of individual change and what individuals have to go through to cope with a new scenario. But we should also think about what the team has to go through, because it's the individuals ultimately come together as teams. So there's some ideas here that we'd like to talk about. Firstly, organizational metaphors. This is from a guy called Morgan, and he identified some ways of categorizing organizations. For example, he spotted a metaphor of machines, because he saw some organizations are actually quite mechanical in the way they work. So quite often engineering and organizations, manufacturing, work in a very systematic way. All the cogs have to fit together to be efficient. So it's kind of like a machine. Now, therefore, it's quite predictable. But if you take one cog out, then the other cogs no longer work. So you have to be very careful. He identified a number of others that we cover in the course, one of which is the political systems metaphor, and that's really where all decisions are built around hierarchy. And in a way, if you look at Parliament or if you look at any government organisation, people with power tend to be the people with reputations. So it's not so much hierarchical; it's kind of classically who you know. Then there's another metaphor that you use with brains, which is organisations that interact very dynamically. It's very difficult to see how they actually make decisions, and therefore difficult to change them. And the other one that he talks about is flux, and that's really organisations that seem to excel in chaos or in disruptive environments. And you see the really in the digital age, the really fast growing ones are those organisations that react to things and can actually take advantage of situations. You know, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles are really, really dynamic. And so they are actually living in flux because they don't get too stable in any particular scenario because they might need to change again quickly. So that's one idea. Another idea is Belbin's team roles. And in that one, he identifies 8 different types of activities and behaviors that you find within teams. And where you find teams are dysfunctional, it may be that you've got too many people of the same type working together, or you may be missing a particular type. So one of the roles is chairman, the kind of guy who stands back and looks at the whole picture and kind of gets people to agree on stuff. If you haven't got one of them, then who's actually doing the work? And then you have the other ones that are like the resource investigator, who are really good at getting things done and doing tasks. But if everybody's similar to that, who's organising them? So he identifies 8 of these roles, which are quite important in terms of the exam, but important in terms of building your team. People can change roles and they can actually think about behaving in different ways, but the roles that Belbin identifies are really good for understanding where you're starting from. And then we've got a couple of theories of delivering change that are worth considering. One is from a famous psychologist called Kurt Lewin, and he talks about freezing and unfreezing organizations. So his view of the world is that organizations are frozen in their current state. And if you want to change them, then you have to unfreeze them, just like you would unfreeze a puddle of water. But the very important thing there is you have to guide that water to the new state and rephrase it. So once you've refreezed it, then it will start operating again. Now, I've seen lots of organisations during my time where they start the process, they unfreeze, and unfreezing can be setting expectations of good stuff to come, and then it doesn't arrive, and then the organisation loses its values and stops functioning because it doesn't get frozen in a new step. So if you imagine a deep puddle of water, instead of guiding it to the next deep puddle of water, it actually disperses into thin, broadly spread water on the, imagine on a pavement or something. So Lewin's theory is really good in terms of understanding what you need to do. And we'll cover that in more detail in the course. And then there's the very famous Kotler 8 steps. Now, Kotler's a famous professor from the US, and his is all about steps to get you through the process, and very much focused at getting a sense of urgency, working out where you're going, sense of urgency, get what he calls the guiding coalition on board, those influencers that are going to help you make this journey successful. And then it's all about working out your delivery strategy and telling people what your vision are and reinforcing it, looking for quick wins, consolidating your gains, all that kind of stuff. But he's got these 8 steps that are really useful in working out how to get you to the end game. And we cover that in a lot more detail in a lot of our other courses. But Kotler's a very interesting one to do a little bit of research on. Okay, so let's just think a little bit about the journey and where we're going to go. So, first thing that we need to think about is the vision. Where are we going to go? Why do we want to be there? So that's kind of the kind of end game. Then we think about in terms of outcomes, what are those things that need to change? What will we need to have in place at the end to be this new super organization? It's then we can think about delivering it. And when we talk about delivering it, we can think in terms of projects and programs and all that kind of stuff. But we really need to have a clear vision of where we're going and the outcomes that we need to have in place. Outcomes are the change state that we need to deliver. And then when we get all that done, we get benefits. That's the good things. It could be market share, it could be productive workforce, it could be better reward for everybody at the end. Now, there's some themes that will run during that. So we need to continually think about our stakeholders. As Kotler said, the guiding coalition, making sure they're on board, communicating with people, letting them know why we're doing it, listening to them, helping them go through those emotional changes with positive reinforcement. And then once we go into deliver, we've got some things we need to think about. Change readiness. Is the organization prepared for the scale of change that's coming to it? And have we got our plans in place to make sure we can cope? And then the change impact. Firstly, did we actually get what we wanted to achieve? And if there's new changes coming through into what we're doing, what will be the impact of those on the other changes so that we understand the overall picture? Okay, so that's the journey. And again, when we go into more deeper in the other courses, we'll cover that in more detail. But there's the areas that we need to think about. We start, if you look at those and you're familiar with program management, those will start to become a lot more familiar in that terminology. Okay, well, I hope that proved useful. We've got more modules to come on business change management, but hopefully that's put you in a good place to understand the concepts we're going to be dealing with.